Alright, so we are one day into action kicking off in the desert in Indian Wells, the tour's fabled fifth slam, tennis paradise. You've heard all the superlatives, the players love it, the fans love it. Absolutely beautiful ambiance at this event, gets all those superlatives for good reason, and of course, with the tournament underway, we do have our draw, and obviously blockbuster potential matchups, and even early matchups set already. The first of which, now, as of Joao Fonseca rallying in the third set of his opener, we do have a Fonseca-Draper lined up this weekend. And obviously so much more action that we'll be looking forward to over the better part of the next 2 weeks. As I said in my prior video, we're trying to turn over a new leaf this year. In vying for more consistency on my own channel, we're going to try hitting on previewing all these big events. So let's just get into this draw. Obviously here, Jannik Sinner's his suspension settlement with WADA will have him sidelined until Rome, of course, I believe in early May. And so your world number 2, Alexander Zverev, will be the top seed in Indian Wells. You look at Zverev's path, and it is maybe a couple of early landmines, if you can call them that, in the form of, we know now Griekspoor will be his opening opponent. Very tough out of the gates. And poor Talon, he just seems to get horrible draws. Every big event you see, he seems to draw a big name super early on. And, no different here. He's played Zverev plenty over the last year, and he has, pushed him a reasonable amount, despite Sasha getting the better of him pretty much every time. And Zverev's in a spot where he may be a little bit vulnerable after a disastrous February in South America for him. I don't think that's necessarily indicative to how he'll perform Sunshine Double and moving forward, but, when you're in a little bit of an at least mini rut, you can call it, for Zverev, winning matches is the best solution, and, a couple of those early matches with Griekspoor, potentially Marozsan, who is, of course, capable of peaking at an exceptional level and made some noise here last year. It's either him or Pechi Pericard, guys where it might be hard to gain some rhythm. Not to mention a potential matchup with Thomas Mahac, who is, it goes without saying, after winning his first title in Acapulco and having such a tremendous last year plus that Mahac has enjoyed. All of those following names, I don't think I would hesitate in sending Zverev through if he was in better form, just because, they are the exact type of guys where a well-playing Zverev's just going to frustrate them, backboarding them into oblivion. But where his game is, that remains to be seen. Elsewhere, you got Mahac, as I said, who's riding high off the Acapulco title. Tiafoe, who's been slumping since his routine, show up in August, September for the U.S. summer hardcourt events. But Indian Wells does take place on American soil. Tiafoe has made, I believe, the semi, I want to say, in 2023. Also in that section, of course, you have Holger Rune, who, after what I thought was, a promising start to the year at the Australian Open and something he could build upon, yet again, he struggled with health in the events that he took part in following the Aussie Open. As an effect of that, the results have been really rough since Australia and the events he's played, but not a bad draw for him to get back on track a little bit. We'll see if he's in better physical condition. I guess that's the number one thing for him. But certainly these are matches he can navigate his way through. There's potential there, I think, round of 32 to see Ugo Humbert or Kei Nishikori. That's Ugo Humbert not playing in Paris and not with a roof over his head, where he is a whole lot less dangerous than in those conditions. Or a Kei Nishikori who, shout out Kei, always such a magnificent ball striker and watch. Still hanging around there at 35 years of age. It's been a good start to the year for Kei, making the final in Hong Kong. And really quality win over Jaume Munar, who has probably been playing the best tennis of his life. for the same reasons that Humbert's not under a roof and in Paris, that I would say he's less dangerous. I would say that K is live to beat him as well, even if it would probably take one of those razor tight, deciding set matches that K has become so famous for eking out. Really could see anybody make the round of 16 there. Fair or not, Holger's kind of lost his good faith built by that Australian Open run. And then your remaining seeds, Matteo Berrettini, who, is playing quite well as well, coming off a first win over a Big Three member in Novak Djokovic, something that, made me really happy to see in Qatar, just because, I have so much respect for Matteo Berrettini, the competitor, and especially, in his time when he was, a top 10 level guy through the early 2020s, and was continually denied by Djokovic, Nadal. He really did deserve one win to show for his efforts, and I'm happy he got it. But obviously he's got a bit of a checkered past in best-of-3 hard courts. And then lastly, you got the all-of-a-sudden red-hot Stefanos Tsitsipas, who with his Dubai title last week re-entered the top 10. And of course, the big noise with him is the equipment switch going to what's been rumored to be a blacked-out Pure Aero, and I believe also a different setup with his strings as well, that, in its first week of use, saw tangible results in his backhand, upped speeds on his drive, both directions, and visibly, returning really as well as we've ever seen in a couple of those matches in Dubai. And yeah, how quickly things can change, because after a pretty dismal for Tsitsipas' standards, really last 2 years since after the 23 Aussie Open final, and, that continuing maybe to a rock bottom moment the week prior in Doha for Stefanos, where he lost to Ahmad Medjedovic, who could not move after injuring his hammy at the end of their match. Going from there to winning your second outdoor hardcourt title, and definitely his most impressive first 500 title ever as well. Tsitsipas, of course, comes in riding high on rebuilt confidence, perhaps. Big picture, I would imagine that he keeps this racket setup moving forward, at least in the near future. And if that's the case, I am excited to see, if this holds up, because given the better part of the last 2 years, we were inching toward the direction where we were like, I don't think Stefanos, as is going to return to being the contender for majors and top 5, really, mainstay that he had been since, 2019-ish. And, winning a major, that's always still going to be an entirely different conversation. But if this holds up for Steph, I'm very confident he will be back in turn at the end of the year. But we'll have to wait and see, as it pertains to this tournament in particular. Tsitsipas, even Zverev for that matter, a guy who's performed really well in all the Masters events, really. Relatively speaking, this is a Masters event that both of them have struggled at. Not many deep runs I can remember off the top of my head. I think Tsitsipas made the semi in the fall version in 2021, but other than that, can't really think of anything notable here. But for Tsitsipas, the draw is there to make some noise and potentially come out of this quarter. I'd think off Indian Wells' track record and current form, I probably would back Mahoch to take out Zverev. And there's not really anybody else, in the other eighth that really sticks out that would dissuade you from riding the hot hand and Tsitsipas, who, I'm not particularly confident in, given he could see some trickier matchups, and Dubai fitting the bill of the type of quick hardcourt that he has in the past thrived upon Indian Wells, despite change in surface still playing on the medium-slow side of things, not really looking noticeably different to the eye at least. But I guess tentatively I will roll with Tsitsipas to contest that quarterfinal. And, why not? I'll go with Mahac to come out of this quarter. With his power, he is the type of guy that could give Tsitsipas problems if he's hot. And, yeah, he's continued early in 2024 in his uptick trajectory. Of course, coming off the 500 title in Acapulco himself, I'll go Mahac over Tsitsipas in this quarter. You look at that other top half quarter with Casper Ruud being the 4 seed. Couple guys there in Popperin and Piece were off to super slow starts in 2025. Opelka already taken out by Safiullin. Lorenzo Musetti, who's had, real breakout last year and good start, good Australian Open outing from him. Hasn't really played much, but again, Indian Wells, the type of conditions I think that would suit him. Tommy Paul, who we last saw, fell ill in Acapulco, but has continued 2025, super, super consistent, deep runs pretty much everywhere that he has played. Another young Czech off to a good start this year, second week at Australia. Of course, in Qatar, beat Alcaraz in the quarters, and I believe won Brisbane to start the season. Alex Mickelson as well, who's had a good start to 2025, the young American, probably on a collision course here with Daniil Medvedev, who has been slow out of the gates in 2025, but seemed to be getting better. Last we saw him in Dubai. But yeah, getting to this draw, let's start with your highest seed, Casper Ruud, who I think does have the type of draw here where I could easily see him in the 4th round, quarterfinals. Has seemed like your typical run-of-the-mill Casper Ruud start to the season, which isn't always a given. I mean, you saw in 2023 how bad it started and kind of set the tone for the rest of that year. And yeah, I mean, I don't really think Casper's suffered any bad losses this season. Gave a pretty good showing, I thought, with his run to the final in Dallas, and played pretty competitively, I thought, with a red-hot Denis Shapovalov. He'll be here in conditions that are more favorable to his game than Dallas. And as far as I'm concerned, it does feel like Lorenzo Musetti would be that one significant obstacle in his way from making the quarterfinals. Albeit Marcos Giron, who's probably also right now playing some of his best tennis, is no pushover. Giron being who Casper will open against. And right now, with Musetti not really having played that much since Australia, I think I would have to give Casper the edge there. Even though, these are also conditions I think would be good for a well-playing Musetti, but that's the part that's up in the air. And then facing him, I'm very confident will be Tommy Paul. Last year, Tommy was super close to making the final here, playing a much better playing Daniil Medvedev than he is now a year later. You could argue an ill-timed sprained ankle last year was the only thing that separated Tommy from making the final a year ago. And even though he has kind of won ugly plenty this year, he's just getting it done. He is making the business end of every tournament he's played so far this year. His one match with one of the big guns with Zverev at the Australian Open, you could argue he had the better of play through significant portions of that match. And yeah, I mean, that's just how I feel. Medvedev, no Medvedev, I would be surprised to see Tommy Paul not make the quarterfinals here. And I like him also to make the semi. My pick in this quarter would be Tommy Paul over Casper Ruud. Over the last year plus, really, I would say that Tommy Paul has been right in the thick, really among the top of those next tier of non-superhuman players on a hard court. He is right now in the middle of the prime of his career. And the way this draw shakes up, I think this is a great opportunity for him. So that is my pick out of the second quarter. Next up, the Taylor Fritz Quarter. Fritz, your 3rd seed, and of course, a lot of noise being made about how he's been slow out of the gates in 2025. Last we saw him also struggling with an ab injury, but of course, a return to a venue where he has seen a lot of success and is his hometown tournament. So it would obviously be a prime destination to get his season up and running. And you look at Fritz's quarter, and I think it's a great road to at least the round of 16 for him. Not really many hurdles before that in his first two matches. At least on paper, Tabilo's been out of form for quite some time now, and the litmus test match probably will be that round of 16 for him. Potentially getting one of, a Draper, Felix, Fonseca in there as well. As I said earlier, those two are going to do battle, Draper and Fonseca. Likely to face off with Felix Auger-Aliassime, who is off to probably still second to 2022, but the second best start of his career to a season. Already 2 titles in the bag and a third final, semis in Qatar, final in Dubai. And really just refreshing, good to see Felix healthy to start 2025. But yeah, I would think if Fritz is able to clear potentially either of those 3 names, he will be primed to make another deep run in Indian Wells. I guess, with how volatile Felix can be, he's still been riding sort of thin margins in the last couple of weeks, some tight 3-setters to guys that you would expect him to beat more easily. So I can't completely write off Jenson Brooksby, who on the comeback trail has, pushed Tommy Paul in Dallas and already won his first match here, but, probably too early on the comeback trail. I would have to give Felix the edge there. If it's Draper, though, I probably would have Draper beating FAA. Jack, albeit expending himself quite a bit, which does give you cause to pause, given his injury history. But that being said, when he's been active, he has been fantastic to start this year. 4th round, second week in Australia after 3 5-setters, and also some good wins in Doha, making the final there, very nearly winning the title. Regardless of who it is, I probably would back Draper to meet Fritz at round of 16. That will probably be a pretty tightly contested match, but I would think Fritz is going to be super motivated this week, as he really always has been since 2021. Great results here in his hometown tournament, and obviously with the rocky start, he will be keen to get a good result in the bank, especially here in the desert. I honestly think it's completely up in the air of who meets him. I know Andrei Rublev just won Doha and, seemed to get a bit of a monkey off his back a year later after, his season 2024 mostly went off the rails after his incident getting defaulted in Dubai. But overall, Andre just over the last year has been, to me, less of a sure thing beating those ranked below him. Andre would be the projected, quarterfinalist here, but on a slow court, I could see his first match, Arnaldi, being challenging for him, and then potentially a Brandon Nakashima after that. Those are both guys that actually had wins on Rublev a year ago, French Open and Barcelona. And then your 2 remaining seeds are Khachanov and Ben Shelton. For Karen Khachanov, I could very well see Jakub Mensik upsetting him. Another, blockbuster for the audience's early round matchup, but also another tough opener dealt for one of the seeds. Same thing for Ben Shelton, who, after making the Aussie Open semifinal, had a poor run of events in Dallas and Acapulco. So he, too, I think, open there for upset potential, especially if Lerner Tien is able to rally from, I think it was a set down against Mariano Novoni when they stopped. A Lerner Tien that has continued a tremendous breakout start to 2025. To me, there's a lot of names here I could entertain making the quarterfinal. But in a shot in the dark, I will go Mensik. I think good draw for him, and I think a big result this season has been percolating. Quarterfinal, I will go Fritz over Mensik. Again, same reasons. Familiar with these conditions, comfortable with these conditions, and upped urgency for Taylor, obviously, this week. And finally, we get to the bottommost quarter, the Carlos Alcaraz Quarter, the second seed here. Also the 2-time defending champion, who, despite, the Rotterdam title, is off to a little bit of an uneven start to 2025. A lot of the same, of the last 6 months since the Olympics final. A lot of littering the stat sheet, plenty of moments of brilliance interspersed with the same focus issues or, mind numbing, unserious decisions. And ahead of him, it goes without saying, not the easiest draw. Within this quarter, you got Shapovalov, Korda, Dimitrov, obviously Djokovic, Cerundolo, Hurkacz, Demonor as your other seeds. And obviously, for Carlos's purposes, I think the first real danger match is Shapovalov, who has rediscovered, that premier topmost level that he possesses, and really the first time he has flashed that since 2022 in Dallas. Took out, probably the most impressive title run of his career to this point. It'll be interesting to see how Shapo looks now with, conditions coming into play, no roof over the head, and obviously Indian Wells, regardless of the changes, playing a lot slower than Dallas. And I guess it's also worth noting that Alcaraz, his opener, is going to be against Alice, a guy that can serve, hit big, and just came off one of his biggest results in Dubai. Obviously, Dimitrov beat him a couple of times, Shanghai, Miami. But, side note, I do fear that Grigor might have hit the point where he's hit the physical wall. He is at the age where that wouldn't be surprising, and injuries have really just ravaged any time he's taken the court since that U.S. Open retirement last year. Of course, Korda has had success and played Alcaraz tough. Monfils beat him last year and is obviously playing exceptionally well in his age 38 season. And all of that might lead you to believe that, Carlos Alcaraz, who isn't playing his best to start this year, might be open to a potential upset. But I'm going to give you the flip side, is that Carlos Alcaraz has never played his best in January since becoming a top player, which isn't that long, big picture. But each of the last 2 years, he got hurt in Golden Swing and was coming into this event with questions around if he was 100%, and he romped through, especially last year, as tough a Masters 1000 draw as there's been in the last couple years. This year, he comes into the event healthy and with a title under his belt. And to anyone that's watched Alcaraz the last 3 years at this event, he is so at home at Indian Wells. I mean, these conditions, these courts, it is a match made in heaven. I mean, Alcaraz arguably does not look as good on any other court in the world as he does at Indian Wells. I would start to be concerned if, what we've seen the last 6 months plus carries over into, Indian Wells. But this is the stretch of season, Indian Wells through Wimbledon, where he tends to do his most damage. Playing well or not, if he clears that Shapovalov match, I really don't see any way he doesn't make the quarterfinals. And given his track record at this event, good reason to believe that he will play a whole lot better. In which case, should still be very confident that he makes the quarter, where, of course, since the draw came out, we have the potential for another highly billed Djokovic encounter. Of course, since a stellar start to the year at the Australian Open, Novak Djokovic exited that tournament hurt and only has seen one event since where he lost his first match to Matteo Berrettini. And I think by now it's been established that for old man Djokovic, since he exited his prime in 2016, he has performed really poorly for his standards from post-Australian Open, so like February, all the way really up until Rome. That really just seems to be his period to build back up ahead of Roland Garros. And Novak, too, it's not a path where there are that many layups to make it to Alcaraz. I do think he's definitely in the clear for his first 2 matches. He was slated to potentially play Nick Kyrgios, but always was gonna be a tough ask of Nick right now to beat Bodek van de Zandschulp once we found out that was the qualifier that he was going to be getting his first match. And let me just say that between the 3 singles matches Kyrgios has played this year, I do think it might be over for him because it really has not looked good on the wrist front in any one of those matches. He's been very cagey, tentative to hit his forehand. The Bodek match, there were flashes there of the talent, the Nick Kyrgios of old, but for this wrist to be in this state after 2 years more or less out of competition, it just doesn't look good. And, I've not been the biggest Kyrgios fan. You know where my allegiances lie. Nadal, Kyrgios had quite the fiery dynamic between the two. And that aside, Nick has conducted himself throughout the entirety of his career, but perhaps even more so over the last 2-3 years, in a way that has, of course, been a turnoff to plenty of fans. But watching his match last night and how it ended in particular, there was a part of me that felt kind of bad. This is a guy that for a decade plus has told us how much he doesn't care about tennis, and, as of 3 years ago, where the dedication crept in for the first time, the tennis gods have seemed to respond in kind and snatch it away from him right at that moment. But with that out of the way, as far as it pertains to Novak, considering Andy Murray is with him at this event, will be with him throughout the Sunshine Double, in addition to his ranking right now being in a unique spot where he will want to build it up to avoid draws like the ones that he has had this year, there is motivation to pump out a good result here, and going with that assumption, I do think he's in the clear his first 2 matches, regardless of who it is. I do think either one of the seeds that he could see round of 16 would be a great test between Alex de Minaur or Hubie Hurkacz. De Minaur, of course, continuing to play some of the best tennis of his career. Hurkacz, despite the record to this point this year probably not indicating it, he has flashed some very good tennis here and there, and if he can get there, he typically tends to perform against the best players. But, I will send Djokovic through. I think we will get Djokovic Alcaraz again, and it's a very unique circumstance of, a guy 15 years a Legends Junior continually playing, with that being the case between Djokovic and Alcaraz. So we are in a spot, I think, over the last year or so, where Alcaraz is probably going to be the favorite regardless. Every time they play, doesn't really matter how big or small a favorite. That's really just all on where they are in their respective careers, which obviously makes whenever Novak defies the odds, as he has the last 2 times they played, all the more impressive. But if it were to happen here, I think this is really an excellent opportunity for Carlos to shake off some of the scar tissue that has to have built up between these two in their last 2 matchups. This is Alcaraz at the court that I believe to be his most scary, comfortable hunting ground. It's really the only place where start to finish, regardless of opposition, he has had dominant tournament runs. I tweeted out when he won a year ago, I think it is the sort of comfort zone that he has with a particular venue that we saw as a perfect marriage between player and conditions/court, with like a Federer in Cincinnati, Rafa, Monte Carlo, Djokovic in his prime in Miami. So, I'm at a place where I believe Carlos Alcaraz will play well because it's Indian Wells. And when he plays well at that venue, it's tough to see anybody on the current landscape of the tour, especially with Sinner out, beating him. So I sent Carlos Alcaraz through, acknowledging that Novak Djokovic has been thrown pretty much every challenge in the book, and he's more than capable of meeting those challenges, but yeah, at this point in their careers, I still gotta roll with Alcaraz. And with that being the case, going on this whole diatribe of how I feel about Alcaraz at Indian Wells, I think you can probably guess where I'm leaning for the final result of this tournament. But that brings up semifinals of Carlos Alcaraz versus Taylor Fritz. And in the other half, Mahoch versus Tommy Paul. So to start with Alcaraz Fritz, Fritz's ceiling, his weaknesses, they are defined, and the one in particular with the mobility, the variety making strides but still a work in progress, those really are limiting factors against this upper echelon tier of the game, to the point where, I don't really think he stands much of a chance against any of the tier 1 guys playing well. Even if putting in a respectable showing and, it being Indian Wells, I think Alcaraz will be playing well, which doesn't really allow me to see any paths to victory for Taylor Fritz. Really, the only way it would happen is Carlos would have to really stink it up, which, to be fair, he's done on occasion over the last couple months, but this venue seems to be the last place in the world I think that would happen. So I'd go Alcaraz over Fritz, and then I think Paul is also primed for a big result. The last big ones probably were last summer before his year fizzled out a little bit. Last time, he really made some noise was that summer where, starting with the Rome semi, won Queens, Wimbledon quarterfinal as well, and battled Alcaraz tremendously at the Olympics, too. He's playing good ball again, albeit, Mahoch is one of those guys that on any given day could, make a match like this on his racket on any given day. Actually is 2-0 in their matches. They played twice at the end of 2024, two, pretty reasonably tight matches in Tokyo and Shanghai. Though I do think a court like this might help Tommy Paul, neutralize Mahoch's power a little bit. And yeah, playing so well here a year ago on U.S. soil, I think Tommy Paul is primed for making waves at an event of this caliber again. I'll send him through to the final. Obviously, he has a history of playing Carlos Alcaraz tremendously well. Even in a lot of the victories, it hasn't been one-way traffic for Alcaraz. And last year at the Olympics on clay, where Paul might be the most vulnerable of all the surfaces, I did think a Carlos Alcaraz who was playing some of his best tennis, arguably his best tennis of the year at the Olympics last year, was going to clean Tommy's clock there. Because up until the final, he really was doing that to everybody else. And in a match where from the get-go, Tommy had Alcaraz's attention and really made him work hard, he competed tremendously in conditions that I thought would make Alcaraz overwhelming for him. Actually controlled much of the second set, served for it at 5-3, and then obviously Carlos came up with a miraculous, magical save on set point in a tiebreak. So I am kind of convinced that regardless of conditions, Tommy Paul just knows what he's doing against Carlos Alcaraz. If they were to play, I would probably rate Paul's chances, right there with, if not a bit behind Djokovic's, just out of respect to Novak. And I know if he played Carlos, the urgency and the antennas probably would go up for that match. But other than that, Paul has as good a chance as anybody to make a match with Alcaraz at Indian Wells competitive. But on the flip side, it is Alcaraz at Indian Wells, so that's my defense. I kind of throw my hands up, and I am of the mindset that if Alcaraz plays well throughout this fortnight, he will lift the title. History would say this is the venue where he's more likely than any to play well. And as he settles into what is his most successful part of the season, I expect him to again kick it off the right way. I'm going with Carlos Alcaraz's three-peat in the desert. And yeah, that's tying a bow on my predictions, my thoughts on, the Indian Wells field this year. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and feel free to leave your thoughts on the draw as well in the comment section below. But thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.